Hello, this is Emmanuel, and I'm going to be talking about randomness as described by Nassim Nicholas Taleb in both The Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness, which are books written by him. This is for my STAT551 class. So first I'm going to be talking about the Ludic Fallacy, but first let's define what a fallacy is. It means a failure in reasoning which makes your argument invalid. For example, if I generalize from one specific instance, like my car accident and how bad my injury was, I can't speak for every accident that occurred, because that would be generalizing, and that would be a fallacy. As for the Ludic fallacy, ludic comes from the Latin word ludus, which means games. So the problem with the Ludic fallacy is we treat probabilities in real events in real life, as if they were games in a casino. First of all, we need to know what exactly are the odds of the real life events. And second, even if we do, we can only estimate it because we don't know for sure the chances are. And third, the sources of uncertainty are not defined, meaning that we don't know where these random events are coming from for the most part. Now for the narrative fallacy, this problem is accepting the story or an anecdote as evidence for finding the chances of an event, or finding specific patterns, or just to justify a conclusion. The problem with this fallacy is that we have a tendency to overinterpret stories, and we are more likely to accept them as facts rather than accepting raw truths. For example, I have a fear of airplanes, but that's only because I've heard of stories where there has been airplane crashes, and I'm afraid that the same thing will happen to me if I get in an airplane. Now, bias is defined as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another one. And survivorship bias is when you overestimate the success of an event or experiment, whatever that may be, by only looking at the survivors. The ones that fail are ignored and they go unreported. For example, let's say I do a survey of 100 traders in Wall Street. Out of those 100 traders, only 5 of them become millionaires. I could say that my survey, 100% of traders become millionaires by only mentioning those 5 survivors and ignoring the other 95 who didn't become millionaires. Now the problem of induction. So first we're going into inductive reasoning, which is making observations and using those observations and the experiences as evidence to jump to a conclusion. But the problem with this approach is that it doesn't take into account variables that might be random, and our knowledge is limited. Because of this, it is a problem of induction, and we are more likely to be fooled by black swans. Now, what is a black swan? According to Taleb, a black swan has 3 characteristics. Number 1, it's an outlier. It's not normal or average. Second, it is outside the realm of our regular expectations, so it has to be unexpected. And third, it carries an extreme impact, which can either be positive or negative. Notice that black swans are subjective because what may be unexpected to one person may not be to another. And it has retrospective predictability, which means it seems predictable after it has happened. Now, predictions are scandals because they involve 3 fallacies. First, predictions underestimate the variance or variability, which means they pay more attention to the average or the mean than they pay attention to the variance or the spread of the data from the mean. For example, the weather, an average in San Diego could be 80 degrees, but the area could be 20 degrees, so it could be as cold as 60 degrees or as hot as 100 degrees. So you might have to either wear a jacket or wear clothes that you would wear to the beach. Second, they don't account for the fact that predictions become weaker as that predicted time period gets longer. So this weather example that I just mentioned, if it's predicted to be 80 degrees in San Diego for 1 week, then as it gets longer than 1 week, then it becomes weaker because weather is random and there's more likely to be occurrence at black swans. And finally, the Ludic Fallacy is misunderstanding some variables because we treat some variables as non-random when they actually are random. So we think the formation of clouds is non-random because of patterns, but they may actually be random because it's part of the weather, and there's always black swans when it comes to weather. Now let's talk about Locke's definition of a madman. A madman is a person that ends up having correct conclusions, but by using false observations and claims. This is most common with historians because they already know that World War I, World War II, and other events have happened, but they can come to horrible reasons as to why. And same thing as if I talk about the 1987 stock market crash, and if I say it happened because the traders and investors spent too much money on risk. What I said may not be true, and I don't have evidence to prove it. And also, reality is not that simple because of black swans involved. Now, let's talk about the notion of Mediocristan and Extremistan. But first, in Mediocristan. So, it involves variables that are not scalable, which means there are limits as to how low or how high they can go, which means there are really no outliers. And also, there's typical members that exist, and those are average. So when your sample size is large enough, not one instance will significantly change the total or the average. So black swans don't really have an impact in Mediocristan. And also Mediocristan follows a bell curve distribution, which I will talk about later. Now, in Extremistan, the variables or measurements are scalable, which means that there is no limit as to how low or how high they can go. So there used to be a time when there were no millionaires. Now there are. And now there are also billionaires. And one day there could be a trillionaire. Because these measurements are scalable, the black swans are present and they have an impact. Because of this, inductive reasoning becomes a problem, as the black swans are always present and our knowledge is limited, as I said earlier. And because of this, Extremistan is not distributed in a bell curve because of the asymmetry, which means the left side of that distribution is much different than the right side of the distribution. Now let's compare matters in Mediocristan and matters in Extremistan. Notice that professions such as dentists and waitresses, the salaries are consistent and so they're more predictable, and the average salary is not really affected by outliers, so they're Mediocristan. Other measurements that are also Mediocristan are height, weight, and calorie consumption because the human body has limits. However, in Extremistan, there are professions such as investors and traders who could be millionaires or could be really poor, so there's more randomness involved, and the black swans are always present in those professions. So the average is non-existent, and what's also Extremistan are populations because we now had 7 billion people previously in history, and also income because there is a lot of inequality. These are just a few examples of Mediocristan measurements and Extremistan measurements. Now let's talk about the bell curve. Notice that the average or the mean is 0, and it's at the highest point because it's the most common measurement. And notice that the standard deviations are the spread of the data from the mean. So notice that one standard deviation has 68% of the data because you look at the left side, it's 34% next to -1 and 34% next to the number 1. So you add them together, and within one standard deviation, you have 68% of the data. Notice that the bell curve has symmetry, which means the left side is identical to the right side. So why is this bell curve a fraud? Well, according to Taleb, the bell curve is symmetric, but in reality, there's asymmetry because there's inequalities involved, there's outliers and black swans involved. So the bell curve is really based on Mediocristan principles. So the mean is severely affected by outliers. For example, let's say I have 3 traders that I surveyed and I measured their incomes. One of them is 50,000, the second one is 60,000, and the third one is a millionaire. well, the millionaire will affect the mean because it's a huge number. Also, we know that one standard deviation contains 68% of the data, but that may underestimate the probabilities of outliers because there may be more outliers than we think. So in conclusion, Taleb argues that reality is full of unknown variables, and we aren't even aware of most of them. We don't even know that they exist. It also doesn't have linear correlations, so one thing may not simply cause another. There may be more variables involved. Because of these unknown variables, the black swans are always present in life, and we are easily fooled by chance. Although we can't control the black swans or any random event, we can control our actions and accept that we have limits in our knowledge as human beings. We should also be more skeptical of assumptions, theories, hypotheses, and observations. Even if it seems obvious, we should always question them. No matter how many times we try, we cannot absolutely prove something. This is the problem of induction. But what we can do is disprove something with a counterexample. Also, it's not over until it's over. What I mean by this is, let's say that I'm in the middle of a poker game and I'm almost done with it. I have a 5% chance of winning $1,000, but the game is not over yet, so I still have a chance. And here are my references: Fooled by Randomness by Taleb and The Black Swan by Taleb, which are two books I can buy from Amazon if you're interested in reading them. Thank you for watching this presentation and listening, and have a great day.